Welcome to ICA webinars. I'm Peter Saunders, your host and the Chief Executive of the International Christian Medical and Dental Association. And today we're really pleased to have back Dr. Santhosh Mathew to speak to us on the subject of work, vocation, profession, and the heart of God. So it's a pleasure to introduce again Dr. Santhosh Mathew. Santhosh, the world of work is changing. As we all know, COVID-19, work from home, the post-COVID economic challenges, the Ukraine war, the uncertainty of the future in a divided world, and all these things have brought the discussion on the purpose of work and also the method of work front. AI, of course, and related developments will affect the way work is perceived and practiced in the near future as well. And although healthcare can be protected from major disruptions, some of the aspects are impact thinking in healthcare too. This session is going to revisit the theology, a framework to look at work as calling and vocation, and reflect on how can influence our professional and choices. Dr. Santhosh Mathew trained originally as an internal medicine specialist, and he works part-time an internal medicine consultant in Duncan Hospital in India, a 225-bedded Mali border. He is also, however, the global training coordinator for ICMDA, developing an online platform and overseeing what we do in terms of formal trainings, diploma programs, training tracks, and also webinars. He is also, of course, the ICMDA regional secretary for the South Asia region, one of ICMDA's 14 regions. Santhosh has pioneered HIV and TB healthcare programs in marginalized communities. So he's got a lot of hands-on experience, and he's involved in hospital leadership roles across North India as well. He's married to Sarah, who is an anaesthetist, and they have two grown-up children. Santhosh, and we really look forward to hearing what you have to bring to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for this opportunity and privilege. What I'm going to do over the next 20-25 minutes is to look at the context of work and how it affects us, and going back to some foundations of theology. Part of this was done during the Arusha World Congress as a pre-Congress workshop. I think that is where Peter picked up my name from. The overview of this presentation would be, we would first look at the understanding the context, the post-COVID context of work. What has been some of the changes in the way work is perceived? What are the changes in expectation from the emerging generation of workforce? We heard a few weeks back Professor John White talking about Gen Z and Gen X. What are their expectations? And then we would look at some of our foundations of work, our theology of rest, and then how we can hold it together, and how should that affect our frameworks of thinking, and then look at how can we build a bridge between what is happening in the world and our understanding of work, which leads to an opportunity for us to engage differently. The first part of the presentation is on our understanding the context. Most of this have been taken from the last couple of years of articles in various journals on which look at research on work, including the Microsoft blogs, the McKinsey, and the HBR, and other things. So I want to look at primarily from the corporate, the technology work perspective, but draw some practical implications for healthcare too, because data from healthcare is not much available. Somewhere towards the end of 2021 or early 2022, there was a phenomenon reported in all over the globe called the Great Resignation, especially in the technology field. It was said that 44% of Generation X and Z who were in technology field resigned. And there was a study done among them, and what emerged was that there were three major factors which led them to move out of formal work. One was the worsening of work-life balance. Of course, pay freeze or cut was one reason, but equivalent was the toxic workplace culture. And because of that, large number of people moved out of the workplace. And one of the writers said that the pandemic reminded us that people are not machines, like the industrial era. Suddenly there was an awakening that even in 21st century, in the current context, we were treating workers as almost like machines. And those who did not move out, there was a study done among them, and it was found that almost 40% are waiting for the economic to stabilize and then move on. And HR decision makers and all of them recognize that soon many will leave. And they suddenly started realizing that unless make retention a policy priority, you may not have people to work. But there was also an interesting divide in this whole conundrum. The employees felt that they're doing well, they are productive at work, whereas the leaders felt that only 10 to 12% are really productive. So there seemed to have been a divide between what the employees felt and what the employers felt. So employers, it's another study which shows that 70% of the employer felt that the work-life balance is very good, or the mental physical being is quite okay. Career development is there, company culture is quite okay, resource management is good, whereas the employees felt looked at it completely differently. So towards the end of that period, toward 2021 end and 2021 beginning, research is done among the frontline workers felt that the organization does not build culture and stress is going to increase. So organizations had to come up with certain ways of creating a caring culture. When you don't have it, it is difficult to create in a. And this increasing stress was in all fields. If you look at here, healthcare, almost 60% of healthcare workers too felt it. This is global numbers. And it was across all generations, including senior level and junior level. Interestingly, there was a global data of this, and it is across all countries, except from African countries where there was probably no data. Most of the other countries, including South Asia and Central Asia, had high increasing stress levels reported. So, but many of the younger workers, that is Gen Z and Gen X, were asked as this progress, would you come back to the workplace if you're offered face-to-face? They said they will come back. 73% said they need a better reason than just work. They need to be more development and learning opportunities, and especially to meet with their peers. And a face-to-face contact, building them, interaction was more important than just going to office for work. The second phenomena which happened around this time or a little later was something called the quiet quitting. Because the economy was very unstable, many did not leave. So what happened out of this is most of them tried to go to remote, ask for a remote way of work. And if you look at the data, all over the globe, remote work has increased. From 2020 to 2000 to 2023, large numbers have moved into either a model way of work or mostly online. But those who did not want to do this took up this so-called quiet quitting, basically going to work but doing the bare minimum work, recognizing that they can't afford to get out of work, but they don't enjoy, so they'll do the minimum possible. And there were studies done among especially the all generations, looking at what are the stress factors, what are the worries they have. 12 worry indicators were looked at. And interestingly, it was found that all those in the Gen Z group and some in Gen X group, most of them were more than 7 to 8 items of worry constantly affecting their life, which included security, health, finances, social connections, and keeping up with change. And interestingly, this 18 to 26 and 27, 28 are the new generation of workforce entering the workplace. And analysis of their expectations, the younger generation, like Professor John White reminded us, showed that they are willing to work if there is opportunities for individual expression and inclusion. They wanted connectivity and community. They wanted a diverse workplace, but an equality. And take responsibilities early in life, but work within an ethical framework. They were much more pragmatic, but wanted independence. But in the middle of all this, they were looking for a holistic health and wellness. Why is this important? Because it is that generation, if you look at these two peaks here, 30 years, 28 years, that peak is the generation which is entering workforce, including in health, 20s and 30s, with a different way of looking at work due to the post-COVID scenario. And if you look at the southern continent, the average age is 20s to 30s. In India, 35% are below 25, 45% are below 35. Nepal, 55% are below 35. Look at Africa, the young generation entering the workforce. The question is, does it affect healthcare? We don't have data from healthcare, but all of us know that during COVID, the young residents or young doctors were in the forefront as COVID warriors or taking care of COVID patients. Just after COVID, in 2022 middle, 6 months after COVID subsided, I had an opportunity to travel to Kathmandu and spent time with about 15 young doctors who were in the forefront. There was this young doctor sitting next to me, and I asked him a question. How was it? He started crying, sobbing and crying loudly. Now, in South Asian men don't cry. And seeing him cry, many others started tearing up. So I said, what happened? He said, I just completed my MBBS and my internship, and the COVID hit. I was put into duty in an ICU. In my 5 years of training and 1 year of internship, I never saw a person dying. In 3 weeks, I declared 18 deaths. Then he stopped. Then he said, I came from a non-Christian background and came to accept Christ through a pastor, senior pastor. He was my church pastor. His son was my youth pastor and my mentor. Both of them were in the ICU under my care. They would ask me to pray for them. I have never prayed publicly, but here was I praying for my pastor and my youth pastor, who's my mentor. I would connect them to their family through my phone because they were not allowed. They were in the ICU on BiPAP. I would connect them to their family, and I had to declare both of them their deaths. I waited for a few minutes and asked, what will you do now? He said, I don't know whether I want to go back to medicine. Hearing this, a person next to him who had done a residency was doing internal medicine residency in China, who had come back because of COVID to Nepal, said, I also had a similar experience. I'm exhausted. This is 6 months after COVID. I asked him, will you go back to China to complete your residency? He said, no, I do not think I'll continue in medicine. I'm looking at alternative ways of engaging. I don't know what the stories are today. Probably I'll go back and ask, but there are multiple stories of young doctors who have been emotionally challenged during the COVID epidemic. We don't have data whether all this is affecting choices, but certain trends are visible. At least in Asia, medicine is no more the top career choice. At one point of time in Asia, medicine and engineering were the top choices. Today it's 6 or 7. And all those who apply, majority are women. Men are dropping. Interestingly, this year's residency applications, the top choices were radiology, dermatology, anesthesia, and medicine. I can understand radiology and medicine because they are high earning, but anatomy, I'm nothing against anatomists, but they were not the glamour professions. Glamour professions were OBGYN, surgery, but people aren't applying because the younger generation is expecting short-term, few hours flexibility. Even globally, if you look at the projections, this is US and world report, in the projections, medicine is no more there, but medical technologists are high in the list. Respiratory technologist, nurse, health service manager, epidemiologist, professions which reduces may not have much stress. So in one sense, what are we seeing here? We are seeing that the COVID has created a context where people do want to work, but they are looking not for money or positions, but meaning and value. They're looking at team and community. They're looking at contributing through their innovation, excellence, and abilities. At the same time, a holistic, flexible lifestyle and work. We go on to the next aspect of it. Keep this in our mind as we go into the next part of our presentation. What does the Bible tell us? What does the Bible talk to us about work? This part of the presentation is taken a lot, much from some of our leaders like Vinosha, who did sessions for us in our various training programs. The work for us was created before the fall, which means work is given to us as a mandate by God. And our God is a God who worked to create. He created the whole heaven and the earth and all what is in it. And he continues to work today. And when Jesus was asked why you're working, he said, my Father is working, so I'm working. And he's upholding the universe today by his power. And even today, he keeps us without sleeping, by working to keep us protected and safe. And then in the Garden of Eden, as he put Adam there as a representative of humanity, he gave them 4 mandates, or 4 cultural mandates, or 4 things to do. The first was the manual work. The Lord called the man and put him in the garden and said, take care of it. Another version says, keep it in order. To keep the order of creation which God had created, which is good. Today, we are in a context where it is disordered. So the mandate is to reorder what is disordered. So that is the first mandate given to humanity. The second mandate was to govern and influence the context. The word is rule over the creation, the birds and the thing. That rule over is not actually ruling in the wrong sense of it, but to govern, to be a steward, to influence. We have taken it to the other level and ruled over and destroyed a creation, but the purpose was to govern and influence and take care of the creation which God had created and handed over to humanity. The third job was a scientific function. The humanity had to look at what God had created and name it. Is in science, the creation of God, we discover and name it, whether it is molecular biology or gene mutations or anything, everything is created by God. We discover and name it and give it a meaning and say, this is why it happens. That is what the first zoologist did, Adam, to name the animals, a scientific function. But then God looked at him and said, it is not good that a man be alone. He needs a helper, a companion to journey with him. So he gave him a companion, Eve, to journey together, male and female together as a community, to live and work in relationships. So the 4 cultural mandates which God gave to humanity was work that was mandated to take care of God's creation, a work which gives meaning, through a governance or leadership or a stewardship function, an influencing function which makes a difference in the context where they are kept. Of course, to be co-creators with God or understand what God has created and give a name to it. And this has to be done in the context of the relationships and a community. In one sense, another author has said that it is restoring order in a disordered world by ruling or influencing and creating, but in relationship with God and each other. The question is, what does it mean for us as healthcare professionals? What does it mean to create disorder out of disorder in health, in the patients who comes to us, in the communities where we take care of health of the communities? What does it mean? How do you create order? How do you influence a larger context using those skills for the purpose of God's kingdom, his creation, to usher in the new heaven and earth? How can you and I be creative and innovative in the way we do things? And how can we create communities through which it is done? That's the question we need to ask. So the first conclusion I want to draw here is work was created, ordained by God and not a curse. It was before the fall. But rest also was ordered by God, and Sabbath was made for man. It was not to work and burn out, but to rest. There is a story of Sisyphus. Sisyphus in the Greek mythology. Sisyphus cheated the gods and landed up in heaven, eternity. The gods were very upset. So what the gods did was they punished him. He could not be sent back. So they decided to punish him. The punishment given was he has to roll up a stone up the hill every day. It will go up, it will come down. A dreadful punishment, a hopeless labor, a mundane, routine, hopeless labor day after day. I don't know how many of us feel like that we are going round and round the circle of unproductive or meaningless routines. But this is very important to understand that many in workplace are going through this. But then in the Bible, we get a different picture. God rested after 6 days. But rest did not start after work. It started before work, because day one started with night and day, which means there was a time of rest and day one was a day. So rest comes before work. And we work because we know we can rest. Interestingly, John Kostler says, Sabbath is not to restore us. It is definitely to restore us, go back and be refreshed spiritually, emotionally, physically. But more than that, is to restore us. When we look at work through the perspective for which work was created, we get our bearings back. The meta-narrative big picture comes back to us. We are restoring. An excellent book written by Judith Schultz called Sabbath. She writes like this: God stopped to show us that we create becomes meaningful only when we stop creating it and start to think about the why we did it. And she gives this example of this mechanical dolls, which does not have a mechanism to pause. He said, many times, if we are like the mechanical dolls, it will make us less human. And she goes on to say, we have to remember to stop, because we have to stop to remember. We have to remember to stop, because only when we stop, we will remember why we are doing what we are doing. But we also know that even if it doesn't work, we don't find meaning in what we are doing on a daily basis, we do know that in the theology of rest, there will be one day the so-called meaningless work will be perfected, completed, transfigured by God, and then integrated into the new heaven and new earth. That's what God does. And we might think that our job as doctors in heaven is to sit on the clouds and play the harp. That is not the purpose. The purpose of in eternity, the eschatology is that there is work. We will rule, we will live and enjoy God's presence. But there is a work of ruling, co-ruling with God. So again, we should look at what are the practical implications of this for us, those who are busy in our work. What does it mean to rest and restore ourselves in the midst of the busy work we do? These understandings should lead us to look at life from three aspects of our frameworks. I want to look at three aspects before concluding going to the conclusion. One, a framework for life. When Jesus called his disciples in Mark 3, he said he spent the whole night in prayer and he called to him those whom he wanted. Remember, we are called by God because he wants us. Jesus called us because he wants us. We didn't choose him, he chose us. And then the verse says, he called to him so that they can be with him and be sent out to build his kingdom. Now we forget the be with him part. We think the primary purpose is to be sent out, to be the human doers. But we are not human doers, we are human beings. We are called to be with him. And the next 3.5 years, you see, by being with him, they were being changed into what he wanted them to be. There was a transformation happening. And along with that, they were being sent out. In the end of the chapter, as his mother and brothers come to take him forcefully back to his home because they thought he was off his mind, Jesus says, my family is this people who are with me, who are becoming like me, who are my companions in the kingdom ministry. I think it's very important for us to hold on that our life is about being with him, and out of that being with him, be changed into his character and use that to contribute to the greater purpose of the kingdom. Our forefathers understood this very well. Benedictines who would work in the fields, in the orphanages, in the hospices, would stop every 3 hours to pray, so that to remind them that what they are doing is sacred. They would call it ora et labora, pray and labor, pray and labor. Or Martin Luther, in his letter to Christian nobility, phenomenal letter, he says, it is not the priests or popes, they are no different. A cobbler, a smith, a farmer, any officer, they are all like consecrated, like priests and bishops. There is no sacred secular divide. He goes on to say, humans are the mass of God. God works through human work. So very important to hold on to that. And the best example is Brother Lawrence, who was a cook in a monastery. He saw peeling potatoes, picking up straws, taking care of his brother's sandals as meaningful work because he was doing it for God. If you see like that, then our job is no more, our profession is no more a job. It is a job. We need to get our money and our responsibilities, our salaries, but it's more than a job. It's a career because we need to excel, because we're doing it for God. At the same time, use our profession to take care of those in the margins of society. But the ultimate purpose is to see our profession as a calling to build God's kingdom. To hold that picture is very important for us. And we see this role model best in the life of our master. We need to constantly consider it. So let me come to the last section of this talk. What does it mean to us? We saw in the world, the emerging generation is looking for meaning and value in workspace, team and community, relationships in work, excellence and innovation, but flexibility and a holism. The mandate given to us is almost similar. Works that gives meaning, works that is innovative, the scientific function, works that transforms the context, a governance function, but work done in relationship with a work-rest balance and integrated life of holding this together. Isn't this an opportunity? Here is the young generation looking at a different way of engaging, and here is a theology and a context, an understanding of work. We can invite them and call them to engage with us together in the journey of restoring God's mission, because it is God's mission, God's restoration we are part of. Like Chris Wright says, it is not that God has a mission. He has got a church, you and I, through which God fulfills his mission. So what does it mean to us today? As healthcare workers, we need to role model a life of restoring order, influencing the context, being innovative and creative, and working in relationships. At the same time, be available to mentor, support, and journey with the younger generation who's entering the workplace. But to do that, we should be vulnerable, authentic, learning from the new people coming in and teaching and empowering them. But more than that, creating structures which will role model or support such a framework. I remember doing my residency 35 years back. I was told 18 hours of work is mandated. It can go up to 20. Rest, you find your time, because work is worship. And I became a faculty, and I was told that see to it that your residents do not compromise. They should be put to work for 20 hours a day. Just because they looked at me as a simple person, I said, very weak. You're very compassionate. Don't be compassionate. You have gone through tough work, make them do tough work. That is the context in which we were created. The structure was like that. How do you change our structures to create structures of work which supports frameworks where communities can be created? We survived because we created our own internal communities of support. How do you encourage people who are struggling with work to create communities in the workspace to support each other? And then intentionally invite people to journey and experience the work with a difference. It is when we do that, we will find people looking for opportunities where they can make a difference among people who are struggling, who need compassion, care, who are in pain. It is Gustavo Gutierrez who said, the neighbor is in whose path I will place myself, but I place myself and I'll actively seek a context where we can make a difference and be channels of God's kingdom presence there. And that place being a place where our deep gladness, finding meaning, and the world's deep hunger and God's purpose comes together. So I hope each of us in our workplace will continue to role model this framework of being called people who will look at work as an opportunity to innovate, create, influence, at the same time, create communities and work as teams and support each other, not for our upward mobility, but to build his kingdom through touching lives of many people and the communities who are in pain and suffering. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Santhosh. We've been listening to Santhosh Mathew, if you have just joined us, on work, vocation, profession, and the heart of God. So here's a question, and you came up very early on, Santhosh, with this phrase of quiet quitting, which you defined as not taking life or not taking work too seriously, or perhaps even slightly more blunt, doing the bare minimum. And we've got a question here, anonymous question. I mentor young medical students, Generation Z. They're looking for money and an easy life. Priorities are different. How do you change their thinking? And I think you've talked about the importance of listening to the younger generation as well, and hearing their cry for authenticity, community, holism, flexibility, and so on. But what about this other angle? How do we help them really to see life as service, see work as stewardship and service, and a real opportunity?
My own understanding is that every human deep in his heart, whether young or old, is looking for meaning. So the whole question is, when somebody says, I want money, more money, are they really wanting money, or is it an excuse for something else? All people want meaning in life. And there are enough examples of people who look for money and ended up life with no significance and question. So I think it's important to listen not to what they are saying, but not what they are not saying, what's in their heart. So you need to go to the root of the question and ask, is it really money you're seeking, or is it actually meaning? They think money will give them a significance and meaning. The second issue is also that role modeling is very important. Journeying with them is very important. Journeying with them with openness and vulnerability, and sharing our own lives of how we struggled in our own areas of work, but how we found meaning by engaging in what God wanted us to, and how money and other things God gave. Seek first God's kingdom and all will be given to us. It has been part of many people's lives. Help them to see those stories of people who have journeyed and found meaning through this.
It's interesting in the UK here, those who know the context will be aware that all year we've had a whole series of strikes, not just from junior doctors of this younger generation, but also more recently consultants or senior doctors. And next week, for the first time, both groups are going out together. So there will be neither junior doctors nor senior doctors in the hospital, apart from, as I understand it, the most severe emergencies. And the junior doctors are asking for a 35% increase in their wages because they feel this is necessary to compensate a real reduction over the last 20 years or so. And yet, on the basis of what you're saying, people feel that money is the answer, but it's not really addressing the real needs, which are a good working environment, meaning in work, enjoyment at work, good relationships, and so on. What would you say to? I mean, you're not in the UK, but if you had the opportunity, what would you say to a junior doctor going on strike next week for probably the fourth or fifth time this year?
I don't know. I'm not. It'd be difficult for me to respond. How do I respond? But I think the question I would ask is, would money give you meaning? There are enough stories around us, the celebrities and various people for whom money has been the driving force, who have ended up destroying their life. So that would be a question we need to, I would ask. And then share stories of people who have found meaning, not in money, but in contribution to humanity and finding the place where God wants them to be, and finding meaning in, and the resources being taken care of by God.
This question of rest, and you talked about the ora labora cycle, and obviously the Sabbath provision in the Old Testament, the rhythm of work and rest. Claudia Stein is asking, would you say that rest or breaks filled with God are the main practical steps to take to resolve the tension between the extreme of, on the one hand, working in a medical job that might destroy your own health, and on the other hand, a delusional expectation that the job should resemble a pleasant hobby without any hard graft at all? Is this really doable in a work of 24/7 expectation? It will require immense self-discipline. And I guess she's hinting also at the fact that a lot of this pressure to work, some of it is internally driven, but a lot of it's coming from outside and from the expectations of the employers or other people on the team.
Yeah, there is no easy answer to this, but I think the importance of holding the balance between our internal life and the external engagement is very important. And each of us have to create our own disciplines. If you look at Jesus, he was much more busy than any of us were. But he had the ability to live an integrated life where in the middle of a busy work, he would be communicating with God and giving the people the words he received from God. That is our ultimate example. But on the other hand, there were people like the Benedictines who created opportunities in the middle of work to take a few seconds. I think Christine in one of our webinars talked about 30 seconds before he sees a patient to pray for the patient, creating 30 seconds before every clinical appointment he has. Of course, taking time off is ideal, but that may not be possible. But there are also seasons of life. But if the season of life is continuing in a particular way of work, which destroys your ability to build your inner man, there's something wrong in the place where you are. So I think each of us has to develop our own disciplines, but we cannot allow the minister to be destroyed by the ministry. A minister who does not have an internal life is no good as a minister.
And as you say, there's the striking example of Jesus, isn't there? I think of Luke 5:15 and 16, which I call the junior doctor's prescription, which says, as the news about Jesus spread all the more, so many crowds of people came to hear them and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. So it seems that Jesus, even in the face of extraordinary need that he could actually meet, he still employed this rhythm of work and rest, and as God in the flesh, and because of his humanity, chose to refresh himself and saw how important it was. It can be very difficult in some contexts, though, can't it? And Emmanuel Drabo is asking from this is a sub-Saharan African context where you can imagine the ratio of patients to doctors is very, very high. The demands are high. He says, my question's about rest. As a young medical practitioner, there are a lot of challenges when we're in a context of security and humanitarian issues. How can we manage to take a rest when there are so many patients from Monday to Monday in our hospitals, and all the cases are emergencies?
There are no easy answers. I for almost 10 years worked in a similar context. I would see about 120 patients in about 3 hours. I used to call it the conveyor belt medicine. They come in and they go out. After about an hour or so, I've lost my temper, I have lost my cool, I have lost my sense of presence with God. I had to get up. I used to get up, walk out of the room to the corridor behind, walk for 2 minutes and come back and start again, just to get your bearings for that season of life. So how do you create such internal disciplines and try to find rhythm is up to each one of us, but it has to be done somehow or other. But also at the same time, recognizing that this work is given to us by God. It is God's journey. Jesus is journeying with us as we take care of emergencies and difficult patients. He's beside me, gently guiding me. Experiencing that presence is something which we need to inculcate. That is what Jesus was able to do. He could recognize that God the Father is journeying with him. Or Brother Lawrence, who could recognize God's presence in all what he is doing. That is the ultimate model. But it comes through setting in small disciplines in the midst of challenging work to refocus our lives or recenter and recognize that God is journeying with us. He knows the context in which he has kept us. And he will strengthen and give us the ability.
Thank you. You talked about Brother Lawrence and the well-known example where he was filled with joy and scrubbing the pots and found real meaning in the kitchens, doing quite menial work, didn't he? And you talked about the sacred secular divide, and Luther telling us that all of life is sacred. Of course, Paul talked about doing things, our work as unto the Lord, or working as if the Lord himself was our employer, and so on. But I wonder if you could just say a little bit more, Santhosh, about this whole concept of work as worship, and how we might work within our own working lives to live more of this reality of work as worship.
We were brought up in the context of worshiping work. So on one hand, we can worship work, productivity as worship, as an idol. So we were taught that work is worship. Worship comes later. Do not think about worship while doing work, just worship work. This is the Protestant work ethic in which most of us were trained. But then we need to see worship as our work. So our work is a worship to God. What we are doing there is being God's hands and feet, his voice, his hands, bringing healing, listening through our ears, touching him, touching patients through God's hands presence in us. Like Martin Luther says, we are the mask which carry God in us. We are the masks of God. So when we inculcate that knowledge on a regular basis, our daily routine mundane becomes a worship unto God. That's what Paul says. Do everything, whether you are eating or drinking or teaching or praying, whatever it is to do is unto God. Yeah, I know it is not easy because I've gone through the same thing in a busy work. But over time, to constantly remind ourselves that what we are doing is unto God. And God is being glorified by we being his presence in the world.
Now, you talked quite a lot, and the statistics you gave at the beginning were very interesting on the generational differences as well. And there's a question from Robert Stern about generational differences and maybe this tendency for the older generation to overwork or worship work, and the younger generation to over leisure or worship leisure and not see the stewardship responsibilities of it. And yet both groups have insights that the others can benefit from. And Robert's saying, for me, it's the working of both generations, young and old, together. Both have something to teach each other. The younger show us how to make vacation and how to draw the line to work. The older could show how to be resilient. Would you agree? How can we, perhaps within ICMDA particularly, as a very diverse community across cultures and languages and ethnicities, but also of age, help each other in this regard?
Absolutely, I agree to Robert. I think it is working together as a trans-generational community where we are sharpening each other and journeying together as a community. My learnings mostly has been the last 5 years, or 2015 to 2021, where I was working with over 15 young doctors. I've learned a lot from those doctors. I taught them medicine, but I learned a lot about life through their looking at life. So there is that learning which happens at all ages, so at different ages. So it's a transgenerational community. We will work together and support each other. Some things older generation bring in, some things the younger generation brings in, and we learn and journey together. I totally agree with what Robert said.
Thank you. Shakina Koketa is saying, what are the key points to consider while changing jobs? Not particularly one's profession from medicine out of medicine, but within medicine, from one organization to another, from one institution to another. There are good and bad reasons to change a job. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult thing to respond generically, but one principle I follow is the context into which I'm entering, would it give me an opportunity to influence the context for God's kingdom? Or would it limit my engagement with what God wants me to do for his kingdom? So, because we are created to be part of what God is doing in this world. So, if the current context or context is not allowing me in the context of work, and there is an opportunity to engage and enlarge in that, I would say that would be a positive way to look at it. Troubles and problems should not be the reason to shift jobs. Troubles and problems might be opportunities or context that God gives to us to build us to be better than what we were yesterday, to transform us into his likeness. But if God is opening up more opportunities to engage with people and communicate the truth of the gospel and engage with communities who have not access to that, That's an opportunity. Move on and look at other frameworks. Money, position, all are secondary. Take care of God, seek after God's kingdom, all the rest will come to you. That's the way I see it.
Amen to that. You've talked about the secular sacred divide, which is usually in the context, isn't it, of work versus leisure, or work versus spiritual activity in the church. That what we do in the church, preaching, leading youth groups, praying, welcoming, and so on, is Christian activity. What we do at work is not. It's secular, and it's really there to give opportunities to witness and to raise money for the real workers in the church. That's the kind of secular sacred divide. But there's also a bit of a divide too between work contexts. And there's a question here about mission in church hospitals. Is working in mission hospitals the only way to achieve meaning in our lives? Could you comment on this question of whether it's better for Christians to be working in church-related institutions or in secular institutions in terms of influence and effectiveness?
Let me come back with the latter part of the question first. Our purpose of work is not to find meaning in our lives. Our purpose of work is to build God's kingdom through the skills and talents God has given us. So if you see work in that framework, any context, whether it is mission hospitals or public sector or the private sector or your own personal clinics, could be contexts where God's kingdom can be ushered in through your mission. Hospitals are just one model of context where a community came together, a community of believers came together to live together and engage in a ministry. Excellent context. I spent most of my life in that kind of a context. I would encourage people to look at that as an opportunity, but that alone is not the model. There could be other opportunities to be part of what God is doing in this world by being part of an academic institution, by teaching and training others, by pioneering new initiatives in urban context, by being in a government sector and being a witness for the kingdom, for the gospel, by mentoring younger generation.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that in the Bible itself we see some really striking examples, don't we, of believers working in secular environments but being a huge influence, and God using them even to change the course of history. What one thinks of Joseph or Daniel and his friends, Nehemiah, Esther, Mordecai, these people who were salt and light in a community and in a society that was in many ways hostile to biblical faith and values, but they did their work as unto the Lord. Santhosh, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. There's more questions coming, but thank you so much for that. There's some great comments coming through the chat as well, and thank you for reminding us of all the research material on this, particularly what we've learned through COVID, but also, and most importantly, earthing it in a biblical foundation of work as well. So it just remains to me to say thanks again, Santhosh, for your time, wisdom, and preparation for this. We really value that. And for all of you for coming along to ICMDA webinars. We look forward to seeing you again soon. God bless you.